Hi, it's John, and I'm very pleased to be joined today by David Shrier. David's been quite prolific in the global fintech scene as well as related spaces. He is an author, educator, and as well a company builder himself, and I'm very pleased to be joined by him today. Hi, David. How are you doing?
Hi, John. Thanks for having me here.
It's a great pleasure. I thought I would start things off by giving you a chance just to introduce yourself a bit better for those who aren't familiar with some of your work.
Sure. So I'm really interested in this question of how technology can drive change at scale. And so everything I do involves kind of applying technology to big problems. And financial services is a sector that has a lot of problems globally. 3.5 billion people are underserved by the financial services sector, and the other 3.5 billion plus have some, shall we say, systemic volatility and risk, which is in need of some help. So I'm really interested in what technology can do to address these problems, and artificial intelligence is one technology in particular I spend a lot of time on, and then that expresses itself in a few places. So I'm a professor of practice in AI and technology innovation at Imperial College Business School, Imperial College London. And so we're trying to do translational research to kind of bring ideas out of the lab and into real world application, particularly around trusted AI or using AI that behaves the way we want it to. And then I also put together some thoughts on paper or pixels, depending on whether or not you want a printed copy or a Kindle, in the form of various books on technology disruption. And the most recent one that I have coming out is called Augmenting Your Career, How to Win at Work in the Age of AI. And then finally, I don't want to just be someone who sits in a chair and pontificates about innovation. I want to make sure that I'm keeping myself honest. And so I build businesses, and I'm involved with a number of private companies and one public company. And probably the one that consumes most of my time is called Esme Learning, which is, among other things, trying to help financial services workers reskill and retool into the fintech future.
All very interesting stuff, and I hope we have enough time to dive into each one of those aspects of what you're doing, because
we can skim.
Well, no, I think it's important, and it comes together, obviously. We often hear the advice that you should focus on one thing, but I think, as we'll touch on with ecosystem building, and I think that's an aspect of what you're doing, there's a few different things you need to keep spinning to make it all work. Where I first got to know your work, David, was through the MIT and Oxford FinTech courses. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of those and how they came about? And it seems like quite a while ago. They're very well established now, but I know it was a big effort to make it happen.
Sure. No, this journey started actually about 6 years ago this month. I was at the time working full time at MIT, very busy with a number of programs to help the university, help the institute itself to innovate and grow revenue. And I was doing a little bit of light teaching on the side as part of the Media Lab entrepreneurship program that Professor Alex Sandy Pentland runs. And so a student kind of came into our offices. I was talking to a colleague, Joost Bonson, and he teaches a lot of these classes. Joost has taught something like 4,000 students on campus over 20 years. And so we're chatting by the coffee machine, and the student walks in, and she says to us, and this is like January 2015 or so. She says to us, I started the MIT FinTech Club last week, and 150 students signed up in the week. How come we don't have a FinTech startup entrepreneurship class? And so we kind of look at each other, and Joost, I think he was teaching 4 or 5 classes that next fall. So he's like, well, I'm teaching a bunch of classes. And I was very busy on helping build a lab and doing some special projects for Dean and things. So, well, I got a lot on my plate too. This student refused to leave our offices until we agreed to teach the class. Now, when I tell you her name, it may come as no surprise to you because she's gotten a little notoriety in the fintech world. But this class all began because Meltem Demirors, who was at the time an MIT graduate student, refused to accept no for an answer. And so that led to the birth of the class, at first on campus. And so we stood it up there, and not that many people had registered. I think we had maybe 7 people registered for the class by the time the fall semester rolled around. So, in these graduate seminars, you want to have a minimum of 8 students before the department to allow you to use the resources to do it. And so we're looking at that and we're saying, well, gee, maybe we're going to have to cancel this. Maybe no one really cares about this thing called blockchain. or that weird currency Bitcoin that, I think at the time Bitcoin might have been trading at, I don't know, $2 or something. And so so we get there to the classroom, and it's a classroom designed to fit about, I don't know, 35 people in it, and there are 3 people sitting there. And so we're going, oh gosh, this looks really bad. And Yost, who has a lot more experience in the ways of the MIT student, said to me, but just wait a few minutes, just wait. And so we wait, and a few more people start trickling in, and then a few more people start trickling in, and by about quarter after the hour, we had 65 students trying to jam into a classroom meant for 35, and people were sitting in the aisles and standing in the hallway, like craning over the backs of other people, and it was a huge success, and we had to get a bigger classroom, and so that was really exciting, and we're in the middle of teaching that, and this was the first graduate fintech class in North America, and possibly the world. I'm not 100% sure on that second claim, but definitely North America. And so we're sitting there going, there's no textbook, so we're kind of making up the white papers that we're using as a textbook on the fly and doing things like that. And so while we're in the middle of doing all this, these 2 entrepreneurs get introduced to me by a colleague from MIT Sloan, and so they come into my office at the Media Lab, and they say to 2 brothers, and they say, we want to put your class online. And this was a little heretical because at the time, the only sort of approved vehicle for online at MIT was edX, and this would have been using a different platform. So we were breaking new snow, and a lot of online learning is bad television, and we were not really excited about being producers of bad television. So I talked to Sandy Pentland, and I said to him, Sandy, what do you think? And he said, we've been doing a lot of research. This is Sandy speaking now. We've been doing a lot of research on how to make teams work and how to harness collective intelligence and how to make digital interactions more powerful. Tell you what, why don't you tell them that we'll only do it if we get to completely reinvent how online learning happens? And so we went back to them, and these were very dynamic entrepreneurs, and they said, sure, let's do it. And so we did. And that led to the birth of the first MIT FinTech class. Now, I'll pause for a minute if you want to ask some questions, John, but there's a second part to the story.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I'm enthralled, so I'm going to let you continue because I'm curious. I studied at Oxford, and I have great respect for MIT, so I'm curious. It started to spread. It sounds like things are just heating up here in the story.
Yeah, well, so we were putting this together, and we're taking a lot of risk, and it's a new platform. We were working with this completely unknown company from South Africa that, we had to send people who happened to be traveling there for work to make sure they actually had an office and, check them out. So Georgie Campbell, Georgina, who was running, not the Lemelson program. What was she running? She was running one of the entrepreneurship programs for MIT. So she happened to be traveling to South Africa. So we had her go check out the offices, and she said, no, it's real. They've got hundreds of people there, and so we put this thing together, and MIT at the time had not. Now, what I'm going to say now is going to sound incredible based on what's happened in the last 6 years, because we basically invented a new kind of product in online learning. But at the time, no one really marketed their stuff. You would somehow hear about edX or Coursera or something. You'd go to that website, and then you'd shop on this sort of Amazon-style catalog of classes, and you'd have like Microsoft systems engineering classes next to a dog training certification next to a class from Harvard, and that was kind of the experience. But no one really marketed this stuff. And I earlier in my career, I'd worked for some marketing companies. I'd worked for NBC. I'd worked for Disney, and as well as some B2B companies like Dun & Bradstreet that do a lot of B2B marketing. So I knew that you can't just hope the work would speak for itself. You have to actually market it. So one of the radical things we did was a business model innovation. We actually marketed online executive short courses and created sort of this category. And I'm getting angry emails from people saying, why are there ads with MIT's logo on it? How could this be done to this? Whatever. It was just various people were uncomfortable with this idea of advertising. But, there are some amazing things that MIT does for the world that not enough people know about. And so it was really important to get the word out there. And, now 6 years later, everybody's doing it, and it's a commonplace thing. And it's sort of become this fast growth category in online learning. But at the time, it was very new and uncomfortable for people. And so we launched the thing, not knowing how the online thing would do, even just as much as how the on-campus thing would do. And so it's a couple of weeks before class launches, and we have like 150 students signed up, and we're feeling pretty good about that. We're like, all right, 200 students. Yeah, this is good. We had 65 on campus. Now we're going to have 200 online. This is a nice experiment. And then like every day, another 50 people would sign up. And so, and so I get a call like 3 days into this sort of last little sprint before we launched. And the guy who was running the online learning company, Sam Paddock, says to me, I think we're going to have to add another teaching assistant because we suddenly have, 300 people instead of 200 people. I'm like, okay, sure. And this happened like every 2 days until the class actually launched, when we had 1,100 students in over 100 countries. And so it was just staggering. And that began an amazing journey where now we look back, and between the MIT class and the Oxford class, 20% of everybody working in fintech in Singapore has taken one of my classes, and it's kind of amazing. And we reinvented how online experiences happen. And Sam and Rob sold the company off after 1 year of this because they had grown so much they were able to cash out. But we kept going. And finally, more recently, I started a new company together with a business partner to reinvent everything again and use AI to make it even more special. So that's a good breaking point in the story. But sort of halfway between, we moved the classes across the pond to Oxford, and so rebuilt the class as Oxford FinTech. Oxford had a very progressive dean, Peter Tufano, and he was willing to take things even further. And so we launched Oxford FinTech, then we launched Oxford Blockchain, and now Oxford has a whole family of online classes, and we're involved in that in our new company.
Very cool stuff. I had a great experience with Dean Tufano when he was just joining the school. I was the head of the finance club, and he was good enough to bring in folks. Actually, Bill Ackman came and spoke at the school, and so it's
fantastic.
interesting. Yeah, it's interesting now with GameStop and all the questions of media and manipulation and big finance. Fascinating days to look at this stuff.
Absolutely.
So where do you fit cryptocurrency, before we dive into artificial intelligence, where do you fit cryptocurrency into the world of finance and all the things fintech that you had been working on?
Well, I mean, so there are a few threads here, right? I was a bit of a skeptic myself. And it's a curse of too much knowledge, right? I had been a data guy, and I'm looking at the throughput of this weird distributed network thing, and I'm like, but the performance here is terrible. And so, there were some things that I worked on with Sandy. Sandy was far ahead of the curve. Like in 2013, 2014, he organized, and I helped him organize a conference to prevent the government from shutting down crypto. They were going to turn it all off and go after everybody big time with enforcement. And we held a conference that brought together a bunch of government people, industry people, crypto people, and sort of help everybody understand each other's respective problems. And this led to the adoption of the Windhover principles, which for a number of years was the extant AML KYC self-regulation by the industry. So everyone who ran a wallet company was using Windhover, that grew out of this conference that Sandy and I and another guy, John Clippinger, had put together. And so, but that was kind of, I'm like, all right, so now we're not going to be helping Silk Road traffic children, but still it was like this thing that I don't know. But I kept hearing about it. And so when Meltem insisted that we offer this fintech class, crypto and blockchain was one of the themes. And I said, all right, this will be good for me. I don't understand this thing well enough. My students are going to teach me about it through me teaching this class. And sure enough, they did. And then we wrote a book called Frontiers of Financial Technology that we put out in 2016. And like a quarter of it is about blockchain and crypto. And it sort of grew from there. So, kind of in spite of myself, I've become something of an institutional crypto guy. I don't really understand the long-term durability of the fully distributed cryptocurrencies that try to avoid government regulation, but I am a believer firmly now in the power of enterprise blockchain, in the benefits of central bank digital currencies to support financial inclusion and other government priorities, and in certain application areas like the use of blockchain and distributed ledger to support identity. So there's a bunch of application areas. And then I'm on the board of a crypto company now called Copper Technologies, which is infrastructure, right? So Copper is in the business of basically making it so that Goldman or BlackRock or Aberdeen or Barclays, whoever, institutional asset management players can actually work with cryptocurrencies, which now I think I checked it this morning is over a trillion in market cap. So this is a new asset class, and conventional institutional players, in order to participate, need things that relate to compliance and custody and other dimensions of institutional infrastructure. And the industry has been responding quite admirably. And I liked what Copper was doing, and Dimitri and his team. And so I joined the board there. So I think it's an important asset class. I think it solves certain problems uniquely. I don't think it's a silver bullet. I don't think it's going to replace the US dollar. I do think that the digital RMB is important, and digital euro is coming, and who knows about digital pound. But these are all institutional, right? I don't think Bitcoin is going to replace the dollar anytime soon.
That seems like a reasonable prediction, and very balanced perspective for somebody who was
very bold of me to say that we're took a risk there.
I'll take an easier tack now. Artificial intelligence, and especially when it comes to education, is a topic that you're very passionate about. Where do you see AI fitting into education specifically? We'll try and leave the bigger picture a little bit out of focus then.
Sure, yeah, and there are a lot of interesting applications of AI in financial services. I'm working on those as well, like an ESG AI screening product, for example. But within education, like, let's face it, and this is something we talk a lot about in the book. The pace of knowledge is rapidly increasing. We have to learn something new every other year, every year. Soon it's going to be every month. And how do you keep up with this rapid disruption through technology? And so partly you can do it by teaching yourself how to learn better, but partly we can use AI to help you learn faster and better with more direct applicability to your work. And so that's really the area that I'm fascinated with, that Sandy Pentland first introduced me to. And I had done some work around cognitive AI prior to coming to MIT. It's actually one of the things that led me to joining MIT. I was working with a guy named Phil Harris, who at the time was at Lighthouse Partners, and we were looking at cognitive AI for portfolio manager selection for multi-asset management strategies. It's a really interesting idea, but I realized I didn't have the math or the technology to really pull it off. So I said I should go to MIT. So I hooked up with Sandy, started working with him, and then I started learning about how to improve learning. And so eventually it led to two spin-out companies, one of which I run, called Esme Learning, which is applying this research on computational social science to help you learn better and faster. And the first area that we're applying it to is fintech. We're now running Oxford FinTech and relaunching Oxford Blockchain this fall, and running Oxford Cybersecurity. And these are classes built on our platform that uses AI to help you learn faster and better.
That's really awesome. I saw last year a great example that was a little bit more straightforward than this sort of postdoctorate or advanced education. It was, how do you train McDonald's cooks to optimize the way they flip hamburgers? And it actually uses AI to visually follow their hands and see how they're moving, and basically nudge them towards a better way of doing the process. And it's actually also learning from itself in the process, trying better ways for everybody to be doing it. And yeah, so if you can build that up to something that can help people at the leading edge of developing technologies and business, and that would be really something powerful. So looking forward to seeing more as that develops.
Yeah, I mean, people who went through, so we created an AI entrepreneurship class for the government of Canada, and it was geared towards people who are inside big companies trying to use AI, or people doing startups. We worked with Sheldon Levy, who was former deputy minister in Ontario. He was running an economic development arm of the Canadian government. And what we found is, using these techniques, we were able to get people to be 50% more successful at either launching a corporate innovation project or launching a new company than the typical sort of in-person accelerator or boot camp. So So that was really transformational, using AI to deliver direct career and economic benefit.
Really interesting. Maybe that's a good point. I mean, along the ways here, you've actually been building businesses, helping to build people and their knowledge base. I know you've talked a few times about the subject of ecosystem building, and whether it's in the UK, Ontario, or when we look at fintech globally, that's something I think you're also quite passionate about. Do you want to talk a few minutes and share some of your insights about what goes well when it comes to building a thriving ecosystem?
Well, sure. I mean, I will share with you that I'm very concerned about what's going to happen to our ecosystems with the kind of the COVID effects and the COVID after effects, because there are important things that can happen remotely. And we've all learned to work remotely in the last 12 months in different ways, and even tried to put together remote conferences, which just frankly aren't that great. And we're losing some innovation velocity, because there are certain benefits in bringing people together face to face. And I speak as someone who specializes in remote collaboration. It's still something that there's something about meeting up and accidental collisions that can happen in shared space environments that we're losing. And there's some research that's been done on things like the economic and innovation outputs of conferences that happen downstream. So I do want to highlight that, but accepting for the moment that at least, between open source and Bitcoin and some other things, we've kind of learned how to collaborate at a distance, that we can create these virtual ecosystems. And so they can transcend place and space-based ecosystems. And that's really sort of an interesting concept of how the Ethereum community or the Bitcoin community or other sort of virtualized communities, the Android app developer community, operate. But things that can help with these more geographically located ecosystems. Well, domiciling is important. Do you have friendly government regulation to support growing companies? That's incredibly important to the ecosystem. Do you have government sponsored programs to help develop innovation? So it's a wonderful book called The Entrepreneurial State, which talks about the fact that, frankly, the government support has been responsible for a lot of the major innovations that have built entire industries. And so there's a myth that talks about the hallowed primacy of private sector research and development, but actually government has been integral to a lot of the things that have formed fortunes for those private sector entrepreneurs. Secondly, you want to have a robust investment sector that supports and tolerates risk and failure. So, in Europe, one of the challenges on innovation, as an example, is, it was sort of like if you had a company that failed, your grandchildren were still tarred with the label of, they're descended from that guy who failed. And so that's been changing, but it needs to change more. And that's kind of a cultural issue of, in the US, there's a high degree of failure tolerance, and people reinvent themselves all the time. I mean, F. Scott Fitzgerald had it exactly backwards. There are many second acts in American lives. And so that's kind of another thing, which is this sort of robust funding climate, failure tolerance. Labor market mobility is also important for these ecosystems to thrive. So people need to be able to move to better jobs. I mean, you over-optimize it in Silicon Valley, right? The Valley, if an engineer doesn't see the company going to unicorn status within 6 months, they job hop. So you need something that's maybe a little stickier than that, but less sticky than I'm, graduating from university in Rome, and I want to get, quote, the job, and that'll be for 30 years with a pension. So we need somewhere between 6 months and 30 years, but we need a labor market that is fluid and fungible, that allows sort of the best companies to attract the best talent, and that has failure tolerance on the talent side, so that someone went to a startup and it failed, they can still get a job somewhere else and they're not scarred for life by that. So those are some of the ingredients that are necessary for a robust ecosystem. It is helpful if you focus on a strength. There are very few ecosystems where you can be strong at everything. The Valley is arguably the only one. Then you get ecosystems like Boston, which have a lot of strength in biotech and a little tiny bit in fintech and digital tech, and some in consumer. New York has a few, but in general, if you're forming an ecosystem, you want to figure out what your domicile or region is good at, and lean heavily into that. And so Toronto, for example, very strong in AI, strong in digital, and so those are the two areas where you get a sort of an overabundance of focus and government support.
Maybe a great time. I want to start wrapping it up and giving you a chance to add a few wildcards to this. But what are some of your thoughts on the role of government, and in particular, these days when we see industries converging, it seems obvious to me that old industry-based regulation just isn't up for the job of what we're tackling right now. What are your thoughts when it comes to the state and regulation?
That's a hard one to answer because it's so nuanced, and I'll try and dig into that just a little bit, but I'll be concise. In the U.S., we have too many regulators trying to figure out financial innovation. So you've got 4 or 5 different federal regulators who each think that they're the sole authority on crypto, for example, or neobanks. Even in banking, you have the OCC, but then as soon as it's got blockchain attached, then the CFTC jumps in and the SEC wakes up, and so it's like it's a mess because you also have 50 states attorneys general and 50 state banking regulators and 50 state insurance regulators and 50 state credit union regulators. Sometimes not quite 50, but sometimes there's a different regulator for credit unions. Whereas in the UK, for example, you've got a more unified and coordinated regulatory regimen. So having a little sanity around how regulations are applied and what the regulatory perimeters are is important. I don't think any of the government regulators anywhere have fully gotten their arms around these crossover technologies. So like when big tech gets into fintech, the regulators are still trying to figure out, is it the telecom regulator? Is it the competitiveness regulator, or is it the banking regulator? And sometimes it's all three, and now we're starting to look like the patchwork quilt of the US again. So it is something that I know a lot of people in regulation are thinking about very seriously and trying to figure out answers. So GFIN is one. There are some initiatives out of Cambridge that are pretty significant in this area. The OECD's got a working group on it. BIS has a working group. So people are thinking about it. IOSCO is thinking about it. But we do need to sort of come up with some better coordination and harmonization scheme because the big tech companies otherwise are going to create things like, Facebook and Libra. What's it called now? Diem? They keep rebranding it to try and get one step ahead of the law. But I mean, that Diem I've written a lot about is an example of everything broken and wrong with letting big tech just run amok.
Well, I'm glad you're teeing it up for me. We actually have one of their senior members joining us next week to answer some of those questions. And I've talked a lot about it here in Switzerland because, of course, they've chosen it as one of their hubs. But yeah, I think you raise excellent points, and these are things are not clear just yet.
I'm not saying big tech is intrinsically bad, by the way. I'm saying Facebook
is intrinsically bad. Okay.
Cultural and ethical deficits that they have yet to address.
And they do have that investment from In-Q-Tel, and you might want to make sure that your data and all your finances are going somewhere. Who knows? I mean, that's a little bit
that bothers me less, and we can talk about the privacy side. But no, I think it's just the commercial issues of how their management culture has evolved and how they've chosen to run the business that are deeply troubling for society.
Absolutely. Well, you've given us a lot of food for thought, and with all the information we have to absorb these days, I don't want to overwhelm our audience. Are there any final words you'd like to mention about the future of education, or where those who are interested in beefing up their knowledge can engage with you and the things that you're doing?
Absolutely. So esmelearning.com, esmelearning.com. There's an array of classes. We'll be announcing more with both Oxford and MIT and some other institutions to be named shortly. The new book is called Augmenting Your Career, How to Win at Work in the Age of AI. It's coming out from Little Brown. You can pre-order it on Amazon. And I'm findable on LinkedIn and always happy to say hello.
Great. Well, thank you again, David. And for mentioning those, we'll make sure to put it all up in the description as well for the video, and look forward to catching up with you after COVID is over and we return to a new normal.
I look forward to it. Thanks.
Thanks again, Dave. Cheers.